The Atlanta Falcons killed the 2025 draft. There is no debating that. They absolutely nailed a couple of their picks, adding more capital for this specific draft. But overall, at what cost is it going to be for them to end up giving them that final grade? What will end up happening? We talk about this team 3-4 years from now if this ended up being a good draft. Thank you so much for joining the show today. I am Josh Blender. We break down college football, NFL. That is why the NFL draft is such a special time of year, because the two obviously coincide with each other and we can talk about the two at the same time pretty much. So to start it off, what a couple of days for the Atlanta Falcons. Besides the football stuff, what happened with Jax Ulbrich, the son of their defensive coordinator, deciding to give Shedeur Sanders a prank call? Not going to talk about that a whole lot, but that obviously sucked for a number of reasons. And then during the draft, the football stuff, they ended up walking away with a haul on the defensive side. If you could have told them that they get Jalon Walker at pick number 15, I think a lot of people would have been exceptionally happy about that. Talk about Jalon Walker. This is a player that is athletic as they come, doesn't have the best amount of size that you want coming off the edge, right? He's 6'1", about 240. A lot of times people talk about defensive ends or even outside linebackers. You want him to get up to that 6'3", 250-plus range. Think about Mike Green and that development, who ends up going way later. Pick number 57, 59 to the Baltimore Ravens. Jalon Walker pretty much got sold and going in the first round after his tape against Calvin Banks and Texas early in the season. The fact that both those guys went in those Michael went 11 to the 49ers. Walker goes a little bit later. You can see why teams love taking Georgia Bulldogs. The first thing you notice with him is the speed just jumps off the tape and the way that he moves. It's very similar to another guy that they ended up taking in the draft, and that is James Pearce Jr. So they traded back into the first round into pick number 26. Los Angeles Rams had a very good season, were pretty close to almost knocking off the Philadelphia Eagles in that crazy snow game. They're sitting there at pick number 26, and the board hadn't played out to where they wanted it to. They were very high on Colston Loveland, and Atlanta was extremely diligent about trying to get another pass rusher. They've struggled getting after the football for a long time. Remember, they just dealt away Grady Jarrett on the interior of their defense, and so they decided to replenish those edges for the next 5 years plus, and they trade up to get James Pearce Jr., who a lot of analysts talked about. He could be a top 5, top 10 selection in the 2025 draft going into the 2024 college football season. Did not have anywhere near the type of year people thought he would, but as soon as he's out there running in his underwear in the NFL Combine and puts a sub 4.5, ran a 4.47 in the 40-yard dash, he's getting drafted almost automatically. You think he's getting drafted in that first round. That's exactly what they did. Love those two picks. Are you kidding me? Those two talents off the edge is an absolute nightmare. Usually there's going to be one power guy that is going to be 6'6", 285 pounds. The other side, maybe you have that outside linebacker. But the fact that they have these two rotating players flying around the football field, putting in sub 4.5s, is going to be horrible for opposing offenses to have to game around. You have speed on one side and speed on the other. So where you're going to go, you would think a little bit more up the middle, unless they're able to bring in more talent on the interior of that defense. Also, maybe a linebacker to fully have that solidified. But also, another thing that you can do is you bring down a very hard-hitting and sure tackling, as well as a guy that can take the football away on that third level of the defense, in Xavier Watts, the safety out of Notre Dame, who was a pivotal piece in Notre Dame making that run into the national championship game. I made another video that broke down the best picks of the 2025 NFL draft and had my favorite pick, the best pick of the third round, being Xavier Watts going to the the Atlanta Falcons in the third round, just because of how late, obviously, that selection was. But the fact that I'm a Chicago Bears fan, I would have been happy taking Xavier Watts. I'm serious about this. At pick number 41. The Bears are sitting there at 39 and 41. They took Burden. In my head, I was thinking Kevin Winston or Xavier Watts. Maybe do something in the secondary. Would have been happy taking Xavier Watts at pick number 41. And this is no BS. They end up getting him at pick number 96. It was a Will Johnson a type of value in him dropping. He could have been a top 10 selection. Johnson ends up going to pick, 47 in the second round. Talk about value. That was my favorite pick of the second round. And later on in the draft, they didn't have a number of selections. I'm looking at it here. They were able to bring in another safety, so that's Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma. Again, with the theme of what we're saying here. I have it written down here that he has a 4.42 40-yard dash to his name and 11 interceptions, which is just a little bit shy of what Xavier Watts had. It's well documented that Xavier Watts led college football the past 2 seasons with 13 interceptions over the last 2 years. They bring in Bowman Jr., and they're going to have to determine whether he's going to truly be a safety or is he maybe going to fill in a bit more in the middle of the defense, playing in that slot, in that nickel position type of role. But bringing in Watts, Bowman, Pearce, Walker, you can see that the speed is really starting to fill. And then in the 7th round, they end up taking Jack Nelson out of Wisconsin, a flyer. This was a very deep offensive line and defensive line type of draft, and they end up going with him later on. I'm going to tie this in a little bit to the 2024 draft because it's pretty obvious that when you decide to take Michael Penix Jr. off the board with the selection that they did, I believe, what was it? It was pick number 8 overall. You had the likes of, I'm going to list it off right now. Rome Odunze was picked immediately after him. Brock Bowers was still on the board. So with Kyle Pitts, you might not have thought that they would go tight end. There was Laiatu Latu. There was also Jared Verse that had been taken. Another guy that's a starter now with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Brian Thomas. So these were about 5 names or so that are picks that they decided to not go in that direction with when they had a Kirk Cousins that they had just signed to a $100 million deal, and they go and take a quarterback. I'm just starting to think that how much of an influence, when we're weighing what happened in that draft, how much of an influence did that carry on into the 2025 draft where they really felt like they had to make a couple of swings with these picks. Very hopeful for them that they hit on at least one of these, but they, to be honest, have to have both of these selections pan out because the NFC is continually getting stronger at the quarterback position. It's not where the AFC is and might not be for at least another 4 or 5 years with the number of MVP candidate contenders that come out of the AFC. But overall, the strength of the conferences, you would consider defense probably to be in the NFC and the offense and the fireworks all happening in the AFC. In Atlanta, because of that pick and going with a quarterback, ends up filling less holes on your roster. And when we go ahead to the 2026 draft, they don't have a first-round pick. And that second rounder that they gave up to get James Pearce, that was used on a tight end by the Rams and Terrence Ferguson. So you can see where I'm going with this. If Atlanta does not have a solid year, and again, they did have a good season. Michael Penix comes in a substitute role for Kirk Cousins, and they are close to making the postseason right behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But next year is massive because that Penix choice to take him at 8th overall, and then this draft, they have to have a good season for it to weigh off, because if you don't and you wind up going 5-12, and that would be a top 10 selection, which you lose with James Pearce Jr. trading back in. I'm not saying Pearce would have been available at pick number 46, like the way Mike Green fell all the way in the draft. There weren't concerns about off-the-field stuff with him, but that would be catastrophic. And I'm saying catastrophic with confidence that would be for them if they were not able to have the value of that selection. The Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to say it, they need to make the playoffs next year and make that next step with Penix in year 2, ready to roll with the weapons they have. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson, that offense is ready to go. And with these pieces now on defense, Xavier Watts is going to start, Bowman is going to be working in there, and then you need Pearce to start and Jalon Walker, all of them to begin to start for your football team and be immediate impacts. So the cost, we don't know quite yet because we don't know where that 2026 first-round pick is going to be. But hopefully for the Atlanta Falcons fans is that it isn't outweighed by what you ended up paying for it, which is significant and exactly what the Los Angeles Rams were trying to do, is stockpile more picks in a draft that was relatively seen by many people to be a little bit weak on the Super Bowl caliber player, that superstar talent, a bit heavier with the starters. So thank you so much for watching this. I am going to give the Atlanta Falcons a straight B, no B minus, not B plus, straight there, because this is a wait and see one. With a lot of drafts, you're like, oh my goodness, this is ready to roll. We need to see Walker and Pearce, what that year looks like. How does Penix perform? Because I'm not going to let them get away with that selection also last season in taking a top 10 pick in a draft that was just littered with absolute blue chip caliber. So I appreciate you sticking around and watching all the way through. We're going to keep piling and coming at you with more football related content. So check in, subscribe for more, and we'll see you with the show next time.